The conferences in Kansas also eventually led to the establishment of what eventually became known as the International Sculpture
Yeah,
Center,
right, right.
one which still in existence,
It limps along.
with different a different perspective and
Different
life
perspective.
than
Yes,
its
that's right.
beginnings.
That's
Fair
right.
thing to say, I suppose.
And by the time I got involved with them, I'd met you, and then I got you involved also with the ISC, uh, and
But
then
long before that, once you had your the space that you could start building things, you got an interest in acrylics.
yeah, well, I got interested in transparency as an issue itself. I felt that no one had ever really used light as a vessel. So I wanted to see if I could make sculptures that were vessels that contained light, not reflecting light, holding light in it. And I went to DuPont, were the ones that made, well, there were two companies that made the acrylic, Roman Haas and DuPont. And there was DuPont was helpful for people that were trying to do embedments. Those were the kind of craft things and so they had one little division that would sort of help you set up a craft kind of level for little things in. So, but that was an entry at least into small acrylic casting. And on that level, well, then the state of California had the first competition for a large public sculpture. And there was it was an invitational competition of five. Pete was one, I was one, but and they had picked me for the cast aluminum work, but I didn't want to. My heart at this point was with the acrylic, but the biggest thing I could make was about this big. But I did that, and I entered that into the competition, and of course they loved it. The first question was, can you make it 6 times or 10 times bigger? And I said, oh, sure.
And like bullshit to make things happen. Right?
And I won it, and then I went back to, well, I met first with the DuPont people in Los Angeles who had gotten me the first little steps. And I told them that I'd won this competition to make this thing at 15 feet. And they said, Bruce, you can't do it. We can't do it. Nobody can do it. You can't cast acrylic that thick. And I said, well, okay. Okay, so I boxed up my model and I flew back east to talk to Roman Haas and DuPont. But I went to DuPont first. And they met with me, the top management in the acrylic division, because there were two trade names for acrylic, lucite and lucite was Roman Haas and plexiglass. Those are the two trade names. And I had this model, and they admired it very much, and they said, but you can't do it at 15 feet. We can't do it. You can't do it. And I said, well, here's what I'm proposing. I'm going to need a lot of the material, not only to do it, the final piece, but to learn how to do it, I'm going to need a lot of material. So what I'm asking is I want enough material to make the sculpture, but then times twice, so that I've got a generous amount that I can do some big experiments. And if you don't want to do it, I'm meeting tomorrow with Roman Haas in Philadelphia. Well, they decided they wanted that they would do it, but here's what they said. They said, you've already gone further than we thought you could, but we could not cast it at 15 feet. So we're going to give you what you're asking for, which is the material times 2. And if you succeed, you will call it lucite. But don't ask us anything for help, because we don't know how to do it. So you're on your own, kid. And the problem was that thicker, right at about 4 inches, you'd get bubbles and cracks, no matter what you did. And that was considered to be just a limitation of the process. But I decided that I didn't believe that, and I was going to try to learn a way to cast it thicker. And so I had already known I needed to have an autoclave. That's this giant pressure vessel, looks like a railroad car. And so I found a place to use one of those. I got it into the shop and got it wired up and hooked up for all the stuff it had to have. And then I decided that the way I learn things is visually. And I felt that if I could see it cause the cracks and bubbles, I might learn something. Now, everyone in the industry said, don't do it. There's nothing you're going to learn from seeing that, and it's dangerous to put these windows in the autoclave. I wasn't crazy. I mean, I bought, the ones made for pressure and all, but it was a little sketchy doing that. But they keep saying that, there isn't anything you'll learn from that, and I just knew if I was going to learn it, I had to see it. Well, so I have these ports on the outside, one above it for light and one on the other side for light, so I can see light through it. And I do these experiments, and I'm sitting there for hours, and then I've got to take a leak, and I go and I come back and I missed it. But I finally saw it happen. I was looking at it, and I saw the bubbles and cracks, and it was like, oh, that's what's happening. And I understood immediately how I could cast any size. I had understood something from observing it that no one had understood. So I was reinforced in my insistence on learning from observation. And so then but by this is mixed in with having won the competition. But at that point then, I knew I could cast it, and did. And it went from the biggest casting ever done. I cast a 2-foot cube, and then, which before had not been possible. And then I cast the big sculpture. And
You poured tens of thousands of dollars in material into a mold, not knowing if it would succeed, really.
Yeah. And but I wanted to gather all of the extra energy. So this was at the time of the moon landing, and I timed the opening of the autoclave for the big sculpture the day that man landed on the moon, to try to see if maybe the technology gods were in alignment and I could pick up a little of that. So
you could link back to the rocket scientists.
Yeah. And and of course the industry, I mean the press just loves the idea, sculptor self-taught sculptor, cast biggest transparent object in the world that industry said was impossible and all. So, you know, they like that kind of story. But I did get a number of people in industry that asked me a legitimate question. How did you do something that we couldn't do? And I said that you, you assumed you couldn't do it. But the, I knew how I learned, and I learned visually. And so my insistence on setting up that autoclave so I could observe what was happening inside let me understood some way to change the process. But I couldn't have done that if I hadn't have seen it happen. When I saw the bubbles it was going from okay, and then I saw the bubbles and the cracks happen, then I knew how I could alter the process and it would work. But it all goes back to having faith in learning visually. I don't learn by books. I don't go to the library. I mean, and I knew that DuPont had probably 10,000 polymer chemists, so I wasn't going to learn anything at the library that they didn't already know.
And probably they weren't risk takers ready to look down a glass tube at the end of high pressure.
Well, there is that, but a lot of it is also just motivation. I was really motivated. I was just so interested to see if I could make these sculptures that held light, not bounce light off them, and that you would see the front surface, the center, and the back, and the landscape behind it. I didn't feel there had ever been any sculpture that did that. So that was that, and
that opened a whole new door.
Yeah, and I did a lot of those sculptures. The problem with them was that as you go, people don't tend to understand that the mass or the weight of something goes up by the cube of the scale factor, which means twice as big is 4 times as heavy, but 3 times bigger is 8 times as heavy.
Yeah, it's exponential.
So the numbers for weight. So I didn't realize that I couldn't make huge sculptures, but there were a couple of other big ones I did. And one went into the museum in Oakland in the pond there. And so I did a couple of big ones, but I did a large number of smaller ones, and they're still around and in important museums. And as long as they keep them out of sunlight, they're still doing fine.
But it also then got attention again from the science technology community for you to make a revolution.
Well, but you're talking about now computers?
Specifically the underwater bathysphere.
Oh, well, the bathysphere, yes. Well, okay. Well, I'm very proud of that, because that was really, yes. So the undersea world, the people read about the big sculpture for the state. And they came to me and said, okay, we've got these scientists that want to go down deep in the ocean. And we build these steel spheres, but at real depths, the glass windows can only be about this big. And they can't see enough. It's just, stuff goes by too fast. We've always dreamed if the submersible could be that the pressure chamber itself was transparent. So the bathysphere itself was the window, and that was the dream. you think you could do that with what you learned? And I was fascinated. I'd been a scuba diver as a teenager and loved the idea that my invention would take people's eyes. Since my motivation had been I wanted to make sculpture that took people's eyes a place they hadn't been, then to take people's eyes to the bottom of the ocean where they hadn't been, that really appealed to me. And there was an institution called the Harbor Branch Foundation, which was run by um, Ed, the guy who invented the Link, Ed Link. He invented the trainer for fighter pilots. It was, and that was a revolution in flying because the problem was you lose pilots and you lose planes, and so to have a simulator, he built the first simulator for teaching fighter pilots. So Ed was a guy who was, hip to stuff, and so uh, uh, he helped finance the bathysphere. And they went on to do a lot of things. I think they discovered more than 800 new species of life. And do you remember the Glomar Explorer? That was the blowout of that terrible leak of the oil well leak in the Gulf and so it was my bathyspheres that were able to go and monitor and direct the way they were plugging the holes.
So it revolutionized submarine.
Yeah, yeah.
Also, it was used to pick up debris and the bodies from the Challenger.
Yes, and I got an award from NASA because when that moonshot blew up, and it was my bathyspheres that found the crew compartment, which was not scientifically important but culturally important.
I guess one could also argue it had scientific significance for the space shuttle program.
Yes, probably it was. Probably it was. So for a while there, I was a figure in the undersea world. That was where suddenly there was money in my invention. And I was looking at really, really getting rich. People came to me and they said, look, if you can make those, there's a whole range of industrial uses for cast acrylic that was never considered possible. And there's a lot of money there. And well, I just, I, I had watched a very good sculptor friend try to be a contractor and a sculptor. And I saw you can't do it. Business, you can't be a little bit in business. It just doesn't work. You got to give it your all. Yeah. So I decided to not pursue it, but there was someone who had run a pretty substantial company who wanted to take that on. And so we formed a company that I owned half of and that he owned half of. Funny thing that company that I owned half of didn't make any money. And then there was another company that he started with the technology that did make money, but I wasn't an owner. And I went and got a lawyer, and I spent what was a painful amount of money, and he spent twice that. And I realized that I was going to be one of those bitter inventors who got screwed over by business, spent then their life complaining and bitter about it. And I just said, let it go. I wasn't going to run the company anyway. And I probably should have fought it harder, but I want to be a sculptor. I mean, so, but it was a bitter feeling, and so there were nights when I was, we had financial squeezes, let's say, and I used to, when I couldn't sleep, I used to entertain myself by thinking of ways that I could kill him where I wouldn't get caught.
I guess that would be understandable.
But so, but all of the thing was that I just never wanted to stop being a sculptor. That's all I ever really wanted, and so all of these other things that come along, I, they were tempting, and there was money that could be made, but all of it meant stopping being a sculptor or a part-time sculptor.
So about that, I first saw you give a lecture at Hayward State. I was a graduate student at San Jose State in sculpture, but we didn't meet then. But within about probably no more than 2 years later, when I was at the University of Hawaii in Manila, you came over as a guest artist, and since we were both in the Bay Area, they stuck us together. We got introduced.
Now let me say to you, you were the only one there that had any energy. So I picked you out as one to pay attention to.
And you introduced me to the International Sculpture Center. I think I was aware of their magazine. But you started telling me about this conference coming up in 1980 in Washington, D.C. And I followed your recommendations, met you there, and you introduced me to a world of sculptors, many of whom I later brought out to Hawaii as guest artists. And actually, then it was the beginning of my connection to the sculpture world.
And that's the way things should happen.
Yeah.
People who are at one level should be looking out for one that was where they were before and picking out our younger stars. And I always enjoyed that. It's funny. Some years ago, a painter said to me, "What's with it with you sculptors? You like each other. Painters don't like each other."
We just need each other.
Well, but it's not just that. I said to her,
because nobody else can stand it.
Well, we're like the handicaps of
The Special Olympics of art.
yeah, and we all know what the others we know what every other sculptor goes through. There's never enough shows. The painters get the shows. We need bigger studios. We need more expensive equipment. So there's a camaraderie of sculptors that painters don't even understand. And I've loved that. And in foreign countries, I call someone up and say, even if they never heard of me, I've been aware of your work. I'd love to come by. It's almost always sure. I mean, we're just different than the painter.
But we also share a need for information. Painters probably do that to a certain level, but for the most part, they're also playing the game of keeping their secrets and having their own little personal secrets. Now, I did encounter that in the sculpture world when I first went to Italy.
Yeah.
But that's actually also changed over the decades, even in Europe. I think there's still a bit of that goes on, but there's a lot more openness, especially places like England and Germany.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of the metal casters sort of gravitated to the iron conference thing, which has gone international, and those are two main countries that German sculptors making cupolas and same in England. And um, but I think the most interesting thing that happened out of the whole metal casting revolution of the 60s into the 70s was then the introduction. A lot of us migrated into computing, and you and Kenneth Snelson were right out front